Hey, Shalom Duvid here with DeShean Marquil, our third installment of our ongoing conversations, trying to talk about issues we care about that are not being covered enough in mainstream news. First week we talked about the rise of black conservatism. Last week we talked about HR 40 reparations. This week is the week before the Democratic primaries. Hopefully next week will be the Democratic primaries here in Detroit. To hope to be on scene. If you follow me regularly, please subscribe so that I'll be able to have 1,000 viewers and live stream, and hopefully we'll be outside from the Democratic primaries and doing interviews. Possibly if Jake Turks comes, I'll be able to get him on my stream, or maybe he'll be able to get us into the Democratic debates, and we'll have some interviews with some of the candidates. We thought this week we'd talk about a preview to the Democratic elections, and the Democratic debates that are going to be in Detroit next Tuesday and Wednesday. And I'm going to do some screen share and give a little overview, and specifically, the different candidates, largely the debate on the Democratic side related to Israel, BDS, the boycott, divestment sanctions with the squad, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. Also, identity politics, how that's playing out in the Democratic primaries, and nationalism, maybe related to the Jewish community. We had this last week, there was the Nationalism conference in Jerusalem of the Shalom Hartman Institute, which kind of like a liberal Orthodox think tank that our rabbi, our liberal rabbi at the downtown synagogue and the head of the Jewish Federation was at, and there's some interesting insights from that. So I'll hand it over to DeShean Marquil to make some opening remarks, and I got some screen shares to fill in some data.
Yeah. Good evening to all the viewers who have joined us. I appreciate you guys tuning in. And like my early disclaimer is that I'm not here to persuade and represent any particular viewpoint, but I'm here to represent an intelligent perspective coming from my particular demographic as an African American male, or any other label you can put on, visual. So definitely my political and personal preferences will be omitted from this conversation, but I would look at it from a broad-based ideal according to my training and educational background, as you already know.
Okay, so I'm going to enter a screen share here real quick and just show a little bit of data, a little bit of what's going on, so people could have a little understanding of some of the demographics, what's going on with the Democratic candidates and debates. So here's I guess a petition to have Ilhan Omar remove her from office due to anti-Semitic statements, looking for 150,000 signatures. They've already gotten over 80,000. So add that into, okay, well, it's too large to add into the chat. Here is Rashida Tlaib yesterday in Detroit at the NAACP conference. They have the annual NAACP conference here in Detroit every year, and they had Rashida Tlaib as one of the speakers, a representative of DeShean Marquil's district. It's a 2-minute, 10-minute clip. I'm not going to play it, but she kind of has "You are all part of the squad," and we'll be talking about the squad and the application to larger Democratic primaries and debates. Here today was the congressional debates on opposing boycotts of Israel and military aid to Israel. Interesting, congressional. So the push right now has been for places across the country to have legislation making it forbidden to boycott Israel. However, universities, younger people, BDS resolutions are passing across the nation in universities. So it's interesting things going on, and I have some other stuff about some other things to show that I'll pop on, but just related to the Democrats. So DeShean, what do you think about the Democratic field? Let me show one.
Well, let me jump right in. Like the whole ideal of Rashida Tlaib at the NAACP annual convention in Detroit, Michigan. I think it's pretty presumptuous because, yes, she's a member of the Democratic Party, but in my opinion, the Democratic Party, as well as the NAACP as an institution, let me hold that ideal. The NAACP as an institution has not been true to their nature and character since the 60s. And, I think it's kind of presumptuous for them to have someone like Rashida Tlaib on that platform because she doesn't represent the entirety of the vision of the NAACP. She has a preset agenda. She openly and maliciously discriminates against certain groups of individuals. You all know who they are, the Jewish community, as well as she's a proponent of BDS, which is totally contrary to civil rights. So I would like to say to those that are in the African American community, like black politics is not for sale to the highest bidder. And, it's a lot of things that come along with this. I think it's a gross misrepresentation of the true nature of our community because in the case of Ilhan Omar, she is an immigrant to this country. Her history is not in America as far as the civil rights struggles, especially representing African Americans. And I don't like how they are co-opting the word color because color, as far as both of their perspectives, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, doesn't mean the same thing. Like they don't identify with the African American struggle. Actually, prior to 9/11, I would, in my estimated guess, believe that they wanted to disassociate themselves from the African American community, and only in the post 9/11 world that they starting to face backlash that they want to associate with the historic underdog. So that's just my opening comment on that subject, Dooley.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the current form of representational democracy where it's basically a lesser of two evils, and the current situation where if you are an African American in Detroit and you're looking at your options. So she didn't even have a Republican opponent. If there had been a Republican opponent, basically no matter who the Republican had been, she would have been guaranteed to win, although she won in the primary against Conyers' nephew or whoever. I even have him on my YouTube page, that she came to the downtown synagogue and had a question and answer with we had the district debates, and you were there, right?
For a minute, but I walked out. But I would like to add that, like,
she did come to our synagogue with the two other people running in that same election.
But let me finish.
And it was on the Democratic side where all of the whoever won the Democratic nominee within most of the blue areas moves on to win the election. And we did host a debate in the synagogue.
Her ascent to power was why the majority of the people in the city of Detroit were sleeping, so to speak, politically, because, state and local politics isn't a big draw. So, yeah, obviously she got elected amongst her constituency, and she just kept ramping it up to the point where she had a bigger platform. And those forces behind the scenes sort of kind of manipulated the political landscape. She won in a very controversial race with Brenda Jones. In my professional opinion, I think that, some of those votes were misappropriated, and I don't think she really won outright. It was very controversial as to the nature of the election. So I think in all fairness and transparency, we have to put the facts as they are out there. So it wasn't an easy victory, and like I said in the prior broadcast, she hasn't been highly visible in the 13th district. I only have seen her come out when it's politically beneficial to her. That's what I wanted to say, because like we had an incident in the city recently with one of the Detroit
just to fill
police.
in the hold on, not over Detroit. So most people here are not Detroiters and
I'm filling
saying
them
that
in. But
her
I'm just
district
saying,
includes multiple demographics, so it includes the area that is the largest Arab American community, I believe, in possibly the whole U.S. and a large part of African American Detroit. Brenda Jones, who
No,
has been a
as
city
well as
council leader,
Hispanics in Southwest
Hispanics.
Detroit. But what I want to finish my comment is that, so basically our local police commissioner representative had an incident and it drew media attention and she showed up. So I think that her political presence is very orchestrated and contrived. She isn't a woman of the people. She's not out in the streets. I don't see her doing anything that's making her accessible to the constituents in her district, which includes myself. And so, Duvid, yeah, that's what I wanted to finish up on. But go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, she doesn't represent Auburn Hills. And my district, you represent my Congresswoman, Brenda Lawrence, who actually lives in my neighborhood, had been the part of my same homeowners organization. She represents part of Pontiac, maybe Auburn Hills. DeShean's coming from Detroit. Just a quick comment from the chat, real quick. Someone's asking about your opinions on Marcus Garvey before we move on.
Well, at a particular point in time, Marcus Garvey had a philosophical viewpoint from a Pan-African perspective. I think that it was right on target. So basically, one's interpretation is up to oneself. But for my opinion, knowing a lot about Pan-African authors and topics, I would say definitely that if you can speed it up to the future, that a little Garvey self-determination would definitely be to the majority of African Americans' advantage.
Yeah, I believe, is it Malik Shabazz here in Detroit that's currently like the Garvey leader?
Yeah, that might be true, but I don't consider these current group of Garveyites to be credible. And
we've interfaith. We've both met, part of the same interfaith as Malik Shabazz here in Detroit, and who we'll call a controversial figure. And he's made possible alliances with Nation of Islam. Although he did come in interfaith, he's came into a synagogue. He's also made a statement about purchasing guns or about revolutionary items. Garvey, whether he was an Israelite or his Jewish connection, I have quite a few books, but that's not the right topic for here tonight. So I mean, just regarding Tlaib, the reality of the two-party system and the elections is you have to choose a side. You have limited choices. So if the choice Republican versus Democrat, if Tlaib is the Democrat, the majority of the African American community is going to go with the Democrat Tlaib. And if it was Brenda Jones versus Tlaib, it was the divided district with Hispanics, some whites, Arabs, and African American community. And Tlaib was able to get the Democratic vote. And at this point, as the Democratic representative of an area in Metro Detroit, she does largely speak for a block of African Americans, as they gave her the pulpit,
because that's a misnomer on paper. Statistics are just what they are educated guesses. But in the new Detroit, with the rise of Black conservatism on the move, people is not willing to readily accept the rhetoric of people like Rashida Tlaib. People is willing to step outside of the box and try something different. I would say in my prediction that a significant amount of people who are financially stable, who are working quite well right now or pursuing higher education, is going to want to step away from the traditional collective ideology of the Democratic Party, which has been proven to fail. And Rashida Tlaib represents that ideology. The Arab American community and the African American community in Detroit have historic bad relations. And so that's why I will have to elaborate a little bit further that, she doesn't represent the large block of the city of Detroit. She just happens to be in the city. But the best interest of the city and the constituents and citizens that live in the city is another question altogether.
She won a tight election, and it was partially due to a divided vote among African Americans, where you had Conyers and Brenda Jones, who split the African American vote, and she was able to come in and win the nomination. And when she won the Democratic nomination, she easily moved to. She didn't even have an opponent as a Republican, but it was partially based upon the African-American vote being split between Conyers and Jones. But I mean, we don't have to deal with this at length because most of the people watching are not from Detroit. Just because Forex Shark has been here a few weeks and he keeps on asking about Dr. Ben, and I think he has the wrong. I asked you the question. I think he has the wrong Dr. Ben.
It's the wrong.
He thinks like someone's like selling cures for AIDS or something like that.
Well, no. Let me clarify. It's like the Dr. Ben that I'm talking about is Dr. Yosef Ben Yelkana, who wrote books like The Black Man in the Nile and His Nile Valley Family and other titles. There was another Dr. Ben of lesser notoriety, and I guess he has some cult following or something like that. But that has came up in the past. Like
he wasn't like involved in like selling fake cures to AIDS.
Oh no. My Dr. Ben was strictly a researcher and historian.
Yeah, I thought. I mean, Forex Shark. You probably just confused two different. Dr.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, exactly. Because it was another guy out there that happened to go to prison or whatever happened with him, but no, not the guy that I'm talking about.
But in the current state, if you're, so on the Republican side, you have your neocons that had been never Trumpers and might look at the Republicans, they want someone to primary Trump, or even to say as a Republican, they should want Trump to be defeated. And because they don't consider Trump to be leading the direction of the Republican Party that they want. And you think that that would not be the status of your African-American Detroiters? Are they never Tlaibers? Or are you saying, okay, Tlaib, she's pushing for reparation. Generally, she's representing, or are they going to be saying we would rather have a Republican? Exactly,
because let me break it down. Like the majority,
they did invite her to speak at the NAACP. I mean, sort of the NAACP does not agree with what you're saying.
But the NAACP is a niche within the community. They have become disconnected. They don't represent the original vision. They have become an elitist party who deal in a lot of cronyism and nepotism. They compromise the African-American struggle constantly and sell it to the highest bidders like the Rashida Tlaibs across the board. But I would personally say that the majority of Detroiters, strictly from a political standpoint, will be willing to jump ship and get behind the Trump train, because with the suppression of illegal immigrants, it's greater economic opportunities for African Americans. Like you don't have an oversaturation in the unskilled job market. So that's something to be highly considered. And these are historical problems, because when the Democrats are in control and you got open borders and you have all these other things going on, social programming, that a lot of African Americans were conveniently omitted from the social programming and all the other opportunities that were supposed to exist. So therefore, a lot of African Americans in the city of Detroit see this as a breath of fresh air, because a lot of people have re-entered the job market and have seen a measure of success. So like just strictly from a political standpoint, that yes, it's going to be some big surprises and people is not willing to surrender their position.
Someone had asked last week for me to ask DeShean, but I didn't get to the question. It's directly related to what we're talking about now. Is Rashida Tlaib wins the primary through a divided African-American electorate between two popular Detroit candidates, and also what you just mentioned about immigration, because she has a large constituency of Hispanics. And if she's very pro-immigration, she's attacking ICE deportations, the African-American community. We know the polling, but she could also snuck in there in terms of the divide and conquer story of the electorate by being extremely pro-immigration, is where the African-American community may not be as strong pro-immigration as the Hispanic community, and that might have led Hispanic voters to ask to vote for Tlaib over the African-American candidates. And people last week, at least one person was asking for your opinion about the conflict in the Democratic Party between Hispanics and African-Americans.
Well, yeah, because as of late, the Hispanics, like it was other groups within the Democratic machine that tried to displace African Americans. Like they try to attribute others, for better words, like Arab Americans, Latino Americans, and others, Africans from the mainland, as being the new minority status. So they conveniently ignored the people that were already here for over 400 years, which is the African American community. So this is coming back as a serious backlash to the Democratic Party. They can't gloss over it. They can't deny it. You know, I've witnessed it firsthand myself at the university that I attend, Wayne State University. You know, I received none of the social benefits of any other programming that was supposed to exist. You know, scholarships that were designated for African Americans by African American people were given to the others, like the Arab Americans. There's not enough Latino students on campus. They're underrepresented, but the Latino community I have the most empathy for, because a lot of them are not directly challenging the system. And just to be fair, they do have a history in civil rights in this country versus later arrivals. So it's a little bit more controversial because there are prominent Latinos that did contribute to the civil rights struggles back in the 60s and prior, as early as the 40s. You know, that's a whole nother conversation. But far as the Arab Americans are concerned in the city of Detroit, it's been a historic, rocky relationship between them and African Americans. And quite frankly, when you look at the merits of this country about who contributed to the greater society as far as technological inventions, academic contributions, and in the overall well-being of the society, like disproportionately African Americans and Jewish persons are represented, because the majority of inventions as well as academic contributions come heavily from those two groups. There are others, but you know, as far as the size of the groups and the level of contribution is definitely an overrepresentation, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and related to the identity politics. I mean, Jews obviously are a very small demographic. I mean, to compare to Arabs, Hispanics, or African Americans, and even certain districts here in Oakland County, in parts of Metro Detroit, you might have a large Jewish constituency. But there's no single constituency, even in the heartland of where the majority of the Jews live, where we're more than 50%. So, for example, here, I'm in Southfield, Michigan. It is close to 50% African American, and even though it's next, possibly one of the largest Jewish communities in all of Michigan, it's still maybe 10-15% Jewish. So demographically, in terms of voting numbers, Jews are a small part of the voting coalition, and then you see the overalignment of interest. Historically, so to say, possibly whites vote against their economic interest in terms of voting Republicans, or rural whites that might be in their interest to vote for someone like Bernie Sanders, but might vote for President Trump. It would appear that African Americans, according to polling data, even though it might be against their interest to be pro-immigration, that African Americans are overwhelmingly, when polled, very strongly pro-immigration, and against things like deportation and ICE, even though conceivably it's not in their economic interest. And someone like the Arab community and the Hispanic, you would have overlay of interest in opposing strong immigration policies, like the ICE deportation, the build the wall. President Trump is attacking immigration largely from blacks, from Hispanics and from Arabs.
Well, let me explain.
Even though there might
clearly
be immigration from like Somalians or
right, but
Africans,
let me explain clearly. Like the
block.
So-called representatives of the community, the misrepresentation by organizations like the NAACP has warped the sense and perception of these issues. So historically, African Americans, the uneducated populace within our group, have always voted against their interests, because they believe that it's some utopian vision that they've been sold a bill of goods that definitely doesn't pan out. It doesn't deliver. It puts them in the worst situation. Like, you got people that's on the welfare line that steady trying to think that their problems are everybody else's problems. And it's been a lot of role reversals. Like, unfortunately, it's not unfortunately, but just from a political perspective, like immigration is not an African American problem. African Americans are non-immigrants, and these are the
we have a lot
issues.
of Nigerians.
Well,
and,
no.
like
But those are
Somalians
Africans. I'm talking about Africans of the diaspora that were brought here as.
But what about Detroiters? If someone said we're not going to allow more Nigerians or Somalians
But no.
to come here,
But let me clarify.
or North Africans with African Americans that
No,
have
let
been
me
in
clarify.
America for a long period, how would they
The
feel
bottom line is
about
this:
African immigration?
we are non-immigrants, and that's
you say
a whole.
You separate
African-Americans.
people like Kamala Harris
No.
and Obama who are not African Americans. They're immigrants from Africa.
Right, exactly. And it's like the African American status has to be addressed correctly because we are not immigrants. These people come because they want to come voluntarily. African Americans did not come here voluntarily. So we shouldn't be grouped, or any other group shouldn't be allowed to annex our political gains and associate themselves with our struggles without being entrenched in our struggles. Like, people want the benefits, but they don't want to go through the pain. And I'm highly opposed and offended by organizations like the NAACP that would try to annex the African American voice and place it in other areas as they please for profit.
But so that's why we're dissidents. That's why we're starting our own YouTube, because the organizational structures largely are not speaking our what we believe our interest, or even truth, or they've become corrupted. And we'll talk about the Jewish community.
Well, let's segue into BDS. Like,
Cassandra here had asked in the chat about Rashida Tlaib's connection to Hezbollah, and she does that. I mean, she comes from a large family, and I think has like one of 14 children, and she might have actually had. There has been connections shown that, like, she does definitely have family in Israel, possibly even to Hamas and Hezbollah. The Jewish community in Metro Detroit, the official spokespeople of the Jewish community, the Federation, have came out in support. They released a statement in favor of Rashida Tlaib in her attacks. I mean, you have Republican Jews, among the Orthodox or different strong Israel supporters, but obviously in Metro Detroit, 80% of Jews are strong Democrats and have generally been working together. They're questioning Rashida Tlaib. I went to events like the ADL. The ADL has spoken with Rashida, and but generally the liberal institutions of Detroit have been more protective of Rashida than.
But let me explain why. Because in my opinion, coming from my particular political perspective, it's the cover, for better words, of ethnic whiteness. People want honorary white status. So if that means displacing African Americans and putting us in an even lower subordinate position to elevate the other who is more like the other, then that's what they're going to do. Like, that's the most extreme form of racism that I can think of, is liberal racism.
Well, why would that mean that the larger Detroit institutional Jewish community would be more supportive than questionable of
because
Rashida
of white
Tlaib?
privilege? They want to protect their white privilege. How
does supporting Tlaib protect their white privilege?
Because Arabs on paper are considered to be white. They're not considered to be African or Asian. They came to this country and it was documented that they are white.
Tlaib is, relatively for an Arab, Tlaib is pretty darker skinned.
But it doesn't matter, because
she's part of this women of color group.
No, they use color in the sense that.
But not Rashida Tlaib is not claiming included. Whiteness.
She is
color.
On paper. Like, prior to 9/11,
but according to the U.S., they enjoyed she's white.
Their honorary white status, but since that status has been taken away, then they want to latch on to movements like women of color. She doesn't represent a true woman of color. Her mama isn't a woman of color. She never came out publicly prior to her political career and said she's a woman of color. How many African American schools in the city has she visited? How much money has she donated to African American causes and people of color and their causes and issues? Like, I would definitely be interested in seeing that, because far as I know, I don't see any of that type of activity, and she's strictly political. it's all about her self-interest, and politics is doing what's in your self-interest. But all I'm saying is not off my back. I can't allow myself as an informed, educated citizen to allow my exploitation and second humiliation to come at the behest of somebody like that. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify for people watching who aren't familiar, and I hope to have Amir Zara, maybe even reach out to him and have them even in my house, the Palestinian comedian, professor of law, and he always jokes like Arabs need their own box, but technically Arabs, according to the U.S. Census, are white. If you are an Arab, and when the census comes to you, they don't have a separate box for Arabs, and Arabs do fall under the white box legally. So, I mean, according to U.S. Census data, Arabs are in fact white. But in terms of the squad is this new women of color, and Rashida Tlaib is one of the one of the spokesmen, one of the national media attention of the new squad, even if she's legally, according to U.S. Census data, white, is the spokesman for this new younger group of women of color.
And that's direct political annexation of the civil rights movement, which is largely African American in origin. There were others like those liberal, progressive Jewish people that marched with blacks. I will state the facts as they are, but where were the Arabs, at that particular point in time? I'm just saying from a political perspective, like where were they? If you want to claim, color, and march on a pro-black platform, so you say, then I want to see how active you are in those type of affairs.
Well, they weren't in America at the time because largely it was the same Civil Rights Act of 65 that opened up immigration.
Why should they benefit from civil rights gains if they wouldn't here to help institute civil rights for like people? They the direct beneficiaries of something that they did not contribute to, and I find that to be very problematic.
That's a historical connection that Jews might play in a factor. Like, the Jews worked very hard. The Jews were part of the founders of the NAACP and the precipice for much of the Civil Rights and Immigration Act. However, the current status of the Coalition for Mutual Interest, that regardless of whether Arabs historically played a role in causing this legislation to be, for new legislation to move forward, for example, reparations, which we're going to get into soon, more of the candidates. But so if Rashida Tlaib is an open supporter of reparations, whether she played a part in the past for civil rights or not, doesn't change the fact that she'll be a yes vote for reparations.
Well, she's only going to do what's politically in her best interest to forward her cause. I don't see her being genuine about anything. And that's just my personal opinion. I didn't vote for her, nor will I ever vote for somebody like that, because, again, I don't see her trying to bridge gaps in the community. She has a very convoluted and distorted viewpoint. Like, she's an active supporter of BDS, and that equals political suicide for African Americans, because that's political disenfranchisement. How can we align ourselves with a historic other that doesn't represent our struggles? Like, I didn't see not one Palestinian ever condemn police brutality and violence or go out there early on in the civil rights movement and be present. So I find that to be extremely problematic, and the attitudes of the Arabs in Detroit towards African Americans. They don't reinvest in the community. They set up shops in black neighborhoods, gas stations, party stores. They take and rape and pillage the community, and then take all the resources out in their community. They don't reinvest in anything.
Okay, well, God forbid, you don't want to get into possible hate speech against
no,
Arabs.
It's not hate speech, but these are just the facts on the ground.
Hate speech to make a
no, it's no hate speech, but I'm saying these are the
about
statistical facts on the ground. Yeah, you have your exceptionalists, in every group. You got the one or two people that's willing to go against the grain, but this is not a collective ideology. So therefore, I'm just stating the facts as they are. You can look at all the reports, all the statistics, the movement on the ground, and you can see who's doing what and how they're doing it. And we won't cover up any of those deeds. Like, we will talk about the good deeds as well as the bad deeds.
And just a quick note on the hate speech, because God forbid, a lot of people in YouTube circles are getting censored And according to YouTube, hate speech would include putting an attribute to a whole group of people. And so we be careful about that.
No, I'm just saying collective, like far as if we discussing political issues on the ground in the city, collectively, I haven't seen the unilateral support that other people ask of the African American community. Like that's just not hate speech. That's just pure common sense in my perspective, because people solicit and ask for support, but I don't see it reciprocating our way, and I'm just saying that as a black man myself, I don't see any of these other groups making a serious effort, beside very few individuals within each group, to reach out. And that's all I'm saying.
One of the YouTube policy, hate speech would be ascribing a negative attribute to a group as a whole. But related to why the African American community might do it, because that's just how democracy works. And when you need the votes and you need the coalition and you got to put together the votes, you got to do what you got to do to get a majority and to get the votes. And if you can't get any votes on the Republican side, they're going to have to build a coalition however they can, because or else you're not going to be able to get legislation passed.
Okay, go back to that comment. Somebody asked, who is this? What support do you expect or hope from the Latino communities? Well, the Latino community, I'm not as critical of, because they do contribute to the system. Even unskilled and undocumented workers contribute to the overall Social Security system, and they pay taxes. They work jobs that the majority of people don't want to work. So, the Latino community just has to exist peacefully as they are alongside the African American community in cities like Detroit, where I'm from. I don't see any social unrest between Latinos and African American or black people. So yeah, that's just basically how my opinion is of that subject, because that's really not relevant to what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, and related to multiple different issues, and we're going to move back more into the Democratic debates, but this is important. And these divided demographics here in blue state, and I'm about to show some graphics of general what blue territory looks like, who are part of these coalitions, and we're more commentators and we're more so to say dissidents. The rise of black conservatives.
Okay, look at this. Somebody, one more comment from LA. Latinos are ethnically cleansing blacks in LA, which is sad. Prior to the post-riot LA, you have these dissensions that came between African Americans and Latinos, but pre-riot, when I lived out in Los Angeles, there wasn't that same issue going on. So I have to answer that real quickly.
Yeah, demographic change affects everybody, and it's part of immigration. And African Americans generally have what the pundits or analysis might consider in their best interest, have not necessarily voted or polled on those issues like immigration. So in terms of ICE or Hispanics coming, where maybe in LA after it's too late, after immigration has become so strong, and African American communities are starting to get displaced by Hispanic communities, and now in Detroit you have large protests against ICE deportations. Generally, the African American community has not been so supportive of ICE and deportations, even towards Arabs. The African American community has generally been friendly towards immigration of all sorts, including Muslims and Arabs, even if it's against what the analysis might consider their greater best interest.
I want to say thank you to Count Van Bruno, because I'm sure that you have seen a lot of this.
He says he's from Metro Detroit.
Yeah, and he thanked me. So I want to say thanks for doing your research and understanding where I'm coming from.
Okay, so let me show a little bit more screen share. So we'll move on to, we have hopefully we're going to be outside of the Democratic primaries, the Democratic debate next week. So, here your candidates, the first night, we have 10 candidates, including, let me make this a little bigger. Some of the bigger names, Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the Guru Williamson, Klobuchar. I'm not sure if you have opinions on any of these people.
Yeah, I have an
Detroit.
opinion. I want to ask you about Bernie Sanders. Like, why do you think that he's so adamantly pro BDS?
Well, he's not pro BDS. I mean, he's actually pro two-state solution. He's Bernie Sanders is an old school liberal Zionist, and we're going to talk at length about it.
Mm-hmm.
Second night to me is more interesting. You got New York Mayor de Blasio, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang Gang. In terms of identity politics, Yang appears to be the only one, possibly Sanders, who has more just a general socialist vision of universal basic income or social safety net for everybody that doesn't include necessary things like reparations or racial identitary aspects to it, just saying everybody is going to have this basic outcome. So the second night, I definitely am interested in going. I'll probably go if I can, and certainly if I have 1,000 subscribers and can live stream it, I'll probably be out there both nights. But
yeah,
my perspective,
in my opinion, as far as like the mainstream Democratic Party is really the only chance at this stage of the game. There are a lot of others in the race, but at the same token, I see him as the most serious candidate.
Oh, what night was? I forget to see what night Kamala Harris is. Kamala Harris is going to be the second night. So the second night will be interesting. Biden and Harris, you see if they have another round, and Gabbard from the Hare Krishnas, the Hindu. So to me, like, I think there's going to be more interest what happens the second night. I had showed this map a few times in previous streams, the America racial map, where the blue dots represent, sort of say whites, and the green dots represent blacks, the red dots Asians, and the yellow dots Hispanics, and then others. So you could see, like in LA, the West Coast or Texas, we're talking about, you have a majority in LA, for example, it's less than 25% white now, but the blacks are not, are minority to Hispanics. So out there, or even in Texas.
Well, yeah, obviously it's a population explosion. I don't see that as a bad thing per se, because Latinos' cultural traits and habits is different than other people. Like, a lot of them are largely Catholic, or church-going people who stay to themselves, who work hard, and I don't have a problem with that. It's just
actually anti-Semitism poll-wise is much higher among Hispanics also. According to ADL, anti-Semitism is near 50% among Hispanics. Here, for example, is Metro Detroit. I've mentioned this many times, where Michigan has about 10 million people, and according to the census, about 7 million of the 10 million people in Michigan are white, and of the non-whites, like 80% of them live in Metro Detroit here. This area here is Metro Detroit, and then there's a few other areas that have a decent African-American population, but almost all of the Jewish community almost exclusively lives in these multicultural areas. So I've shown on previous streams the geographic data of Jews, but of the 70,000 Jews in Metro Detroit, over like 68,000 of the Jews live in Metro Detroit, and you have another like few hundred maybe in different areas, and maybe another few hundred scattered around the rest of the state. So the red-blue divide is going to be hugely different. And here in this blue area, saying, so our fellow whites, or or Republicans, minority Republicans in this area, or even the white areas of the multicultural Metro Detroit, is much different than the larger greater Michigan. In the electorate, there will be blatant.
That's true, but the minority Republican vote is going to weigh heavy, because how heavy and how many people choose to jump ship is going to be a very relevant, timely issue in this election, because people is not going to vote according to party lines. The swing vote is always at play in Michigan, but even more so now than in previous times, because people is just not willing to go along with the status quo of the Democratic Party. Like, statistically, they say that a lot of people that voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries, in the primary elections, went on to vote for Donald Trump in the main election. So that's another point of reference that you want to keep your eye on, because in Detroit, people don't believe that the last presidential election, Detroit actually went red. That's something that people conveniently try to cover up. And that's why the Democratic primaries are here, because of that fact. I don't think they just chose Detroit because they like it. I think politically it was significant.
Yeah, and here is some just data on Democratic polling data. So favor for, so to say, socialist big government policies is extremely strong across the whole Democratic Party. 2016, Bernie Sanders, the push to the left. Here's some data dividing it up on racial demographics. I put the link in the chat. There's also, here's data on reparations. For example, they say African Americans, about 60% of African Americans favor reparations. Across America, about 20% of Americans overall support reparations, 60% of Democrats, and it could be getting higher, as much as like 40% of Democrats in general, that it could possibly, it's unlikely that reparations are going to be a majority issue for Democrats, but certainly a majority issue for the African Americans. And it might lead to, more fireworks between someone like Harris and Biden here in the debates.
Yeah, because, reparations sound sexy, for better words. Like I said in previous casts, reparations, the whole understanding and concept is not thoroughly enough understood. A one-time payment isn't sufficient enough to cover up for a multitude of sins. So therefore, I'm of the minority viewpoint that I'm against it at this stage. But who knows? Later on, I can be in favor of a repatriation type of act. If they give African Americans the option to leave, then I will be definitely in favor of that, to go establish myself somewhere else. But I'm just saying, I think reparations is represented by all the wrong people at this particular point in time.
Yeah, I mean, possibly like the NAACP, if Tlaib is backing reparations, that'd be strategic. Something like the 90% millionaire tax, huge leftist agendas to pay for policies. Something I'm interested in, I've done streams on, universal basic income has some popularity. It's unclear. Universal basic income is much more popular among younger voters. And then we're going to move into talking about Israel. So if you want to comment on that, let me look through and try to be interactive with the chat, and then we'll move on to Israel. So if you had anything you want to add, let me start reading the chat. If anyone had direct questions, just do an @Duvid here, and I'll try to read your questions. Otherwise, okay, Mustafli's asking for a rap battle. I mean, we're both Detroiters, could probably do a few rhymes, but DeShean Yehuda is more a songwriter. I'm not sure if he's actually a rapper, but he has written lyrics and rhymes. I'm not sure if you want to answer a request for a rhyme.
No, that's going to take the focus off what we're here for.
And you have any comment on the ASAP guy in Sweden being put in prison and for possibly assault, and then the black conservatives is as a black conservative like Kanye West and people calling Donald Trump in order to get this ASAP rapper out of prison in Sweden?
I think it's more of a red herring. Obviously, it's blatant discrimination. All the parties that seem to be involved in the situation is all out but him. So what is the motivation? I can't say, because I haven't been keeping up with it. But at the same time,
the motivation is saying that it doesn't matter who you are, you're not going to come into Sweden and commit violent crime.
No, I don't think he committed violent crime.
There was a video of him beating up a guy pretty badly.
I actually seen the video.
Who started it or not, but saying obviously he pretty harshly throws a guy into the ground, and his buddies are beating him, and even regardless of the pushing, it's him that grabs the guy and throws him on the ground.
Well, that was the part that was seen, but who knows what happened prior to that? And
But just say if there was an assault, it was him who committed the assault. Whether one guy threw a push or threw something, like in terms of an egregious assault,
I think
it was him that assaulted the guy.
And I don't know Sweden's laws on self-defense, but I'm just saying, like, to be totally even-handed, I will have to say definitely that something happened that attributed a response, and this guy ended up on the ground, and who knows what's going to become of it. But I would have to say more so on the level of self-defense, because I don't think anybody in his position would jeopardize all he has to deal with some anonymous person in the public. I just can't see that.
Well, I mean, he couldn't. I mean, at the end of the day, he attacked the guy, whether it was provoked or not. Like, there's clearly evidence that he assaulted the guy, whether it was self-defense or not. The court will decide. But I mean, the question, like President Trump, and like so to say, President Trump, saying the African American community wants him to do this. And, President Trump trying to show, that he's doing something on behalf of the African American community. Kanye West, who has like a direct, President Trump's cell number, and directly calls President Trump and says, "You got to do something for the African American community." And
no,
then
I don't think this one incident. It could be anybody that has a level of credibility that could be persuasive. I don't think it's a matter of the African American community in the sense of a national emergency. Not at all. But at the same token, I think that just to let bygones be bygones, they should send him home, and then he should never go back to Sweden in the first place. That's my observation and opinion.
Okay, so let's bring this to Israel, and this probably the heart of really what we wanted to talk about in relation to what's going to happen with the Democratic primary. We all know in 2016 that the majority of the delegates wanted to put punitive actions against Israel in the Democratic platform. However, the super delegates overruled it. So all the way going back in 2016, in terms of less support for Israel, calling out the Netanyahu administration, that was already the majority of Democrats in 2016, besides for the super delegates. And now, questions like the boycott Israel. Okay, this article was about reparations. I'm sorry, I put in the chat for people who wanted more information about the current polling status. Here's a quick article, from the Hill. You got the current legislation of, generally you have bipartisan support, although it's minor for what's happening in BDS right now, where there's bipartisan support to support the continued military aid in support of Israel, and to squash down on people supporting BDS, although it's decreasing, and the majority of the decrease is coming from the Democratic side, and a lot of it is coming from African American Democrats. You had John Lewis, who's coming, and so Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are supporting a bill that will allow people to boycott, although it's not specifically mentioning Israel, and John Lewis is supporting it. And certainly in the dissident right to the Never Trumpers, one of the main
let me explain something. Like, from what I know about the so-called or the collaboration between the United States and Israel, a lot of it is coming from the military-industrial complex. So the average person on Main Street, USA, or anywhere else really don't understand what that relationship entails.
Or they're against it. They're not fans.
No, let me explain. Like, they don't know the significance of the relationship in the first place, and therefore
they're actively against it. Your average Democrat is against it.
No. They're against it because they are working with a mechanism to try to destabilize the status quo and structure of this country for other reasons. They have not a right to sit up here and say anybody doesn't have a right to exist and practice self-determination. And last time I checked, politics was a game of winner takes all. So if you look at the historiography of the so-called things that's holding this movement up, they don't have ground to stand on, because if you really look at how all this came to be, there were certain entities and missed opportunities along the way. And I just think it's very arrogant of a person to try to say they're going to boycott anybody while being a recipient of that same technology. If you're really going to boycott and divest, get rid of everything that you got, that you own, like your cell phone. Please refuse medical treatment at the hospital. and work your way down a list and say that if you really want to boycott, then I don't want to. I refuse any services or technology that's been invented and promoted or sold by the state of Israel. Like, you have to do it that way. You can't be a partial boycotter. You got to renounce all of your things that are associated with people and that support the state of Israel, like designer clothes. Like, you can't have that. You can't have a laptop. You can't have several things, So I just think it's nonsensical, and I think it's very undermining to our democracy, because these particular individuals want to stretch push the envelope on how far they can actually go to try to undermine our system while receiving the benefits of a stable government, of courts that you could basically get justice in, and all the rest of the things that go along with the benefits of living in this country.
So I was mentioning to this as we were talking earlier, and so President Trump in his attack on the squad has been mentioning Israel. So Adam Green had on a show last night, was pointing out, President Trump is supposedly American first, and he collected together President Trump's tweets, and he, kind of shows Israel first, American second. So President Trump, we all know that AOC and this crowd are a bunch of communists. They hate Israel. They hate our own country. They're calling the guards along our border concentration camp guards. They accuse people who support Israel as doing it for the Benjamins. And the second one, but the note in all of these is that President Trump attacks the squad first for being against the Jews or Israel, and second for being against America. President Trump's next tweet, they're anti-Semitic.
The so-called squad is a bad
anti-American
representation of what political leadership is in this country. Like, they are at the bowels of the system, so to speak, because their rationalization is not based on anything intelligent.
Why do you think President Trump's main attack on them is for anti-Semitism or being against Israel?
Well, no. He has a right to speak because he's the highest reigning political officer in this country. So
but his attack for them is in defense of the Jews.
No. His attack of them is not. His attack of them is because they attacked him first. That's what people fail to realize. They keep on trying to frame this.
But he didn't defend himself. He defended Israel. And
his
attacks,
listen to
he
this.
Didn't say,
he gave
how
us a
dare they attack the office of the
situation.
presidency. He said, how dare they attack Israel?
Same thing. That's attacking the office of the presidency, because if that's our number one ally in the Middle East, then an attack on the ally is an attack on America.
Right. So that's, your view but a lot of people on the distant right, are questioning, the allyship of the U.S. and Israel, and certainly on the Democratic side, in terms of whether there should be a boycott or not. Whether there should be a special relationship.
A boycott,
whether there should be military aid,
because the whole economics of international importing, exporting is just a fact of life. So, why don't people leave the university system if they feel that they really want to not be a part of our system? Because there's no way to partially do it. Either you're going to be involved or you're not. And a boycott is just, again, nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. It's not practical or doable, because it's too much of our financial system that's tied into the state of Israel, not just for civil purposes and domestic reasons, but for military reasons.
Yeah, so that goes together with globalism. So from the far right or distant right, alt-right, non-neocon that are saying we don't want a globalist America, we want America first. They don't care that say, okay, Israel's part of this global order, but the people who want America first they're not going to be moved by the argument that you need Israel for the global order.
Well, they just out of the loop, because number one, America doesn't live in an island. We are a superpower, which I'm very grateful and appreciative of that, but we still have to interact with the world at large, and we need certain trusted allies for various reasons, like the things that they contribute to, like the Technion.
We're saying we need. We're saying that's your personal desire as an American.
Listen, the American public depends on those relationships. Number one, coming from institutions like the Technion, which is the leading technological institute in Israel, which is our equivalent of MIT. That's something that the government depends on. It's not
saying a lot. This is more a Republican issue of the Republicans who are anti-globalist. I mean, you're basically giving a defense of globalism.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying practical government application. You know, certain governmental powers, all the governmental powers in the world have certain allies that they depend on for various reasons. You can look across the board. This is no other. This is not some unique relationship. This is very standard poli-sci stuff. You know, and the United States just happens to have them. That's just all it is.
Right, and it goes to ethnic nationalism, the divide. I mean, we're largely talking about the Democratic side, but on the Republican side and the identity politics, like I showed the map, where you're looking at a classical Republican conservative view economically of what it means to be a Republican, as opposed to an identity aspect now, possibly from a red state opinion of what it means to be a Republican. And like I said, that like African Americans might not vote their economic interest when they support things like immigration, that whites may not support their economic interest when they support nativism, that they say they would rather be poor with less technology, but maintain a white majority in the country, and things like that in terms of wars overseas that might be in their economic interest. However, if they want to maintain a demographic white majority,
but that's
they're willing
just
to
wishful
forego.
Thinking, because I don't think it's that simplified. You know, even people that want white exclusivity still want the benefits and the advantages and the perks that come along with living in a system. Like,
yeah, but if they had to choose between the two, there's a sizable element of the Republicans that would choose.
But I have to see that more in writing, because I don't see it. You know, I think
you're a blue state Republican.
Well, maybe I could be a lot of things, but at the same token, you know, even if you look at classic examples, even at the height of African American oppression and white separation, you know, you still have people that have forbidden sexual relationships during slavery. So, you know, it's not a fact that people want strictly white exclusivity. I think they want domination and subordination, yes, but not it's like singular exclusivity. I think that's a misnomer.
Oh, I mean, that's okay. That's the debate on the right side. And the people say God forbid, they don't want white supremacies. They want white separation, even if it means that their life is going to economically be worse, that they would be willing to accept a worse state in the global order, worse economics, worse possible health and technological outcomes in order to be among their own.
Right. Look at that cult bear. Slavery wasn't the height of separation. It wasn't. Absolutely correct, because you had white and black interaction every day. Even though it wasn't the best relationship, it was domination and subordination. But yeah, it was no separation even at that particular point in time.
Yeah, places like Sweden that have very strong. Okay, well, let's focus on the Democratic side. But when the Democratic issue is looking at its support of Israel, and you see the new coalition, your anti-Semitism, so to say, rising from the left, your new coalitions being formed, the strategic part of these coalitions, the rising demographic change, you're saying that Jews might have influence in terms of finance or technology or these various things, but demographically, we're relatively a small influence. I mean, what are your plays? How is that going to come out in the Democratic primaries?
Well, it's going to come out in a way just like at the NAACP convention. You know, you got these self-appointed leaders who are trying to amass boots on the ground quickly. You know, the mass is not in favor at this particular point in time, because nobody is marching on the street and saying these people's name. I think that this is more social engineering, people trying to amass influence with whoever they can. And that's basically what's really going on.
Yeah, there was the Sholem Hartman Institute had their seminar on nationalism. You know, Sholem Hartman, his son, Daniel Hartman, who is kind of like an open orthodoxy, accepting, he claims to be Orthodox, but is still very strong Zionist supporter of the IDF. And our rabbi of the downtown synagogue was there. The head of the Detroit Federation was there. and it was largely a leftist defense of Zionism and Israeli nationalism, as where the federation and institutional Jewish community is moving further and further to the left. I mean, me and DeShean Yehuda are both very familiar with leftist Jews in this area, with a lot of Jews who are supporting boycott, divestment, sanctions, a lot of Jews who are moving, not just from being against the occupation, but against the concept of Israel or Zionism in totality as
well, can I make a comment?
as Zionism as an ethno-nationalism, is the idea of having an ethno state, a Jewish state, going against the liberal principles that most Jews in America feel in terms of like segregation.
Well, let me make a comment
making
real
that
quick.
They can't support Israel.
Like, the bottom line is, like, certain people think it's cute to sit up here and be on the opposing side, but let them lose their creature comforts, like the stability of their job, their home, their financial rainy day funds, and then you will see, are they true supporters? Because I think that so-called leftist, extreme leftist support of BDS is like, these are fair weather cheerleaders. Like, they're not the all season supporters, because quite frankly, and I very rarely will ever say something on this level, but the Jewish persons that tend to go in that direction won't even be welcome in the places that they claim that they support, and in particular the Gaza Strip, in particular in amongst Hamas. I sat at the university and listened to like a group, the Students for Justice for Palestine, speak in one of my journalism classes. And one of the young ladies on the panel, who was an avid supporter and leader in this movement, said that outside support in the Students for Justice in Palestine is not welcome or trusted. But see, that's the fact that the majority of Americans don't know. And especially these fair weather cheerleaders of the BDS movement that may be of Jewish extraction themselves, they definitely need to be more in tune to what they involved with, because again, they have no idea what would happen to them if the tables turn.
Okay, there's just a quick question in the chat from Mistopheles. What about Israel deporting the Africans and strongly discouraging Africans to migrate there, or even building detention centers and having mass deportations?
It's a straightforward issue, because every country, like, you're looking at a microcosm, like how much resource do they have, like how much land, how much water, and quite frankly, according to the way that the system is set up over there in Israel, non-Jewish persons don't have the same preference as Jewish persons, and that's just the bottom line. That's just like non-Americans can't just come to this country and say, I want to be a citizen. So, I don't see it any other way other than a governmental issue, a lack of financial resource, even though people like to visualize that these countries, the United States and Israel, got all this money, but the money has to come from somewhere, and the support infrastructure is key in a lot of the attitudes that persist.
Well, that comes down to the larger, kind of fracture between the Jewish community, where the majority leftist Jewish community that has a vision for America that does not correspond with the vision that Israelis have for Israel, and say most of them do not desire to go to Israel. Their major interest is their stake here in America, and they see the Jewish community in Israel pushing for things that at least here in America the Jewish community holds untenable. Like if we're the majority of the Jewish institutional community is pro-immigration, against mass detention and deportation, and then they see Israel doing it, so they either, like the Nationalist Conference in Israel, have to defend some sort of hypocritical opinion, or basically are going to be willing to have a fracture between Israel and America because the values of American Jews does not correspond to the value of Israelis.
That's a contemporary issue. I don't think it's enough information to even have a clear vision of what's going on. What people think and how they represent is strictly a personal choice. Like, the trends indicate one thing, but the individual says another thing. I think that America is a very good place for a lot of people across the board. and people just don't want to give up their security, and that's a common theme. You know,
You're looking here. You have your opinions on creating a Black utopia in America. Voluntary freedom of association would be awesome. You're curious what Blacks would create here in America from like a separatist. And I guess you're not a separatist. You don't support a balkanization of Blacks forming their own state within America. You support further integration.
No, I don't. I support American society in the sense that I live here, but
maybe in terms of like a Indian reservation or something.
No. I don't support
to allow Blacks to have like a reservation.
No,
here in
I believe in
America.
nationhood. I believe that African Americans, if given the opportunity, that I will be more in favor of going back to Africa and establishing a nation under our own flag versus living outside of the continent in a disconnected place. No, I don't support that.
Africans are going to continue here in America. It should be integrated.
Well, no, not even that. Like, people are going to live and group up as they please, but it's no uniformity, you know.
But in Israel, you wouldn't agree that the same would apply to Palestinians, that Israel should push. I mean, I'm a fan of a one-state solution where you should push for integration between Palestinians and Israelis. And, for the people who, would say, let's have a 2 states for 2 people here in America. That,
well, listen to this, just like
Palestinians and Israelis can't get along together. You need 2 states for 2 people. Why not the same in America? You need a 2-state solution for whites and Blacks in America. And what's the difference in Israel where you would say, 2 states for 2 people, and you wouldn't?
No, I wouldn't say any of that. I would say that I don't know enough about the issue at hand, especially coming from an Israeli perspective. I know only of the things of the past. I don't know what's happening on the ground at this particular moment.
But why would you directly be opposed to a 2-state solution for 2 people here in America?
No. Yeah, I'm opposed to that idea. But let me elaborate on what I do know about the Israeli situation. After the first war, Moshe Dayan gave the Arab populace all the rights and amenities of the greatest society one day after the war. And for whatever reason, it didn't quite work out. So that's a historical fact. I think a 2-state solution in America is a total cop-out to the issue at hand. Like, we spoke about reparations. I'm in favor of repatriation. Like, America is not the best place, in my opinion, for Africans to live up to their full potential. It's a good place economically, but nonetheless, it still bears the sin of slavery, and that's not going away.
Listen, the general majority view is for, especially the Democratic Party, is complete integration and living under a civic nationalism where all citizens are equal.
Well, that's why I don't support them.
And so
I'm not a Democrat
saying,
in that sense of the word.
The same people
I'm a moderate.
saying about Africans and Europeans in America, like Palestinians in Israel, Jim Crow didn't work, slavery didn't work, civil rights didn't work. Reparations aren't going to work. What needs to be done is 2 states for 2 people. Like, Jared Taylor would say, they need a peaceful divorce. Integration between Blacks and white has utterly failed.
Well, listen,
it's time for 2 states for 2 people.
Out of the idea, would you suggest?
If you're opposed to that here, if the Jewish community, not necessarily your opinion, if the Jewish community is opposed to that here, like, that's ridiculous. What do you mean that Blacks and whites can't be integrated and get along together, and all of this has failed, and we need 2 states for 2 people, or to, God forbid, send the Blacks back to Africa? But in Israel, you would hold that and say, but in Israel, that's different. That there you can't, the Palestinians and the Jews, there you do need 2 states for 2 people.
Hold that question. Tom Anderson said, what was the bigger sin, slavery or the Holocaust? I see them as equally tragic. The slave trade went on for 400 years uninterrupted. The Holocaust itself is in distant enough memory for us to really get an ID on it. And I can't say one was worse than the other. They both were horrific in an attempt at genocide. That's just the bottom line. Like, it's no up or down. Those issues are just what they are.
Okay, so regardless of your own personal feelings or opinions, what are your predictions for the larger Jewish community not including yourself, but just your feel for the larger Jewish community of what's going to happen moving into 2020 elections?
Well, I totally feel that people are going to gravitate and be where they naturally feel comfortable. So, like, it's like throwing the spaghetti up against the wall. Like, if it stick, it stick. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You're going to have a coming and going on both ends. You're going to have in-group, out-group dynamics. You're going to have people, for other words, getting in where they fit in. And that's just the bottom line. That's the inevitable, because certain individuals are not going to sit up here and be under the banner or umbrella of other things that they don't believe in. And that's just a fact of life.
So from this national conference at the Sholem Hartman, one of the women had mentioned, for example, Emma Lazarus, who was basically a Jewish activist. She was an Eastern European immigrant, and her main issue was trying to get America to allow more Eastern European immigrants to come here. Although, she wrote the famous poem on the Statue of Liberty of, America being a refuge for all people. So that, the person of the Sholem Hartman Institute had mentioned, it's a strategy for the Jewish people to talk in a universalistic terms.
Go up. If somebody made a comment
about helping all people, but saying when the rubber hits the road, do the Jews really support a multicultural benefiting all people, or was it just a strategy that we used historically in America?
It says, hey, hello, somebody. I don't understand the problem here. Is DeShean mad at Israel for stealing the headlines for the concerns of African Americans? Of course not. Like, basically, culturally, the two things we have in common is being both peoples of the diaspora. That just doesn't make any sense. I'm not upset about anything or anybody. I see things through a different lens. So no, I'm not.
Okay. Anything else you want to add on these topics or insight that, besides your own personal views about what you think's coming up for?
What I want to address is, like, going forward, I think ranks are going to be closed. Like, the era of straddling the fence is over. Misrepresentation is not going to be tolerated anymore. People want to be able to speak their own voice without some fake representatives that's self-appointing themselves to try to, like, gloss over the issues and steal all the resource involved. Like, those days are over with. I think that it's going to be a lot more savvy, informed citizens as the days go by, because nobody is going to, I think public office and leadership is going to be harder to hold on to in the coming days.
Okay, I got one more story I want to cover and get your opinions. This happened here in Metro Detroit, and I've been mentioning this in the past. I'm going to screen share it. We got these siege, I guess, people who watch me are probably familiar with some of these. So this was here in Detroit. This flyers was hung up in our neighborhood. These flyers, who hung them up, who knows? It's unclear. Like the FBI and the law enforcement, the anti-Waffen divisions, and a call to join your local Nazis. So it's in the Jewish papers that these flyers were hung up. There's been quite a few of these in the last year. Just, ADL will include this as like a hate crime, just someone hanging up a flyer. This one's more, extreme advertisement for the Antiwafa division. I noticed these skull masks that are pretty popular. A lot of people argue with on YouTube will have these skull masks, for what I understand comes from Siege. I'm going to show this this image here was like this month, and I actually was on OV's stream asking about this. So there were two rival Jewish groups, and one, Chabad had been using the synagogue, and they hired security guards to protect the synagogue. And you could see, like, one of the security guards here is wearing that skull mask. Oh, these were security guards hired by the synagogue to defend them. But here you have that skull mask. I'm not sure if that directly means like he's a member of this anti-Waffen, neo-Nazi division, but that was in the papers, the Jewish papers, this here in largely the white suburbs that, I'm in a largely African-American upper middle class area. But if you go a little further into the suburbs, it starts to become majority white until you get into the rural area. And I don't know if you have any comment on these flyers or Nazi recruitment or the pressure from the red. You have anti-Semitism, so to say, is rising across the board on the Democrat and the Republican side, where you have people openly recruiting for Nazi
I don't swallow
movements.
that wholeheartedly. That might be true. Like,
you don't even buy that it may be true or not. That who knows who hung up those flyers?
Exactly.
Whether it could be a scam.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention an important issue regarding hate crimes, the ADL. So factually, for example, Rabbi got beat up by 3 African Americans here in Detroit a few weeks ago. There's been an epidemic of violence against.
Who's this? Ultra testosterone. I agree with exactly what he said. Ultra testosterone said the Nazi stuff is BS, and I totally agree with that. The community here is too strong for it. You got too many guns and too many people that's trained in so many different ways. It would not fly. It could have been children.
But that's only relatively to this area. And saying, I mean, that's, if God forbid, if it came down to violence in a larger level, the Jewish community wouldn't stand a chance. If you're just talking about a few groups of people, if you're talking about racial wars in general, the Jewish community would not stand a chance. If you're just talking about a small division of punk neo-Nazis,
it's never going to be a racial war because people is too divided. It's just too much division. A racial war is a utopian fantasy, and it's just not practical. It's not doable.
Well, in terms of violence, what I was saying, the political electorate 2020 is basically a racial war. If you look at who's voting, where people stand on the issues, race is basically the complete determinative factor of, if you know a person's race, you basically know a person's opinions.
I think economic interest is the determinant factor, because race is a small component of economic injustice. Like when people got money, they're a lot more at ease than when they're not. Like racism only comes out when political instability shows up.
Okay, so what about the rising amount of attacks by largely African Americans on Orthodox Jews? I saw a map. I was looking for it. In Brooklyn in the last year, there's been close to 50 Orthodox Jews that have been beaten up almost exclusively by African Americans, a few by Hispanics. But if you follow,
Catch Tom Anderson, rich blacks still vote Democratic. Not exactly. Did you see Bob Johnson's latest statement? He was a billionaire from BET who sold his company to Viacom. Rich blacks do not unilaterally vote Democrat. That's another misnomer.
But in vast majority they do. You might have a few incidental, but even of the wealthy, wealthy blacks, probably over 75, 80% of them still vote Democrat.
No, I think you'll be surprised. I think it's an even split, and it might be tipping in the other direction. Back to what I was sharing with you, the rise of Black conservatism is starting to come out of the closet. It's coming out in the public sphere now, and you've seen it within a lot of the Hollywood ranks, not just 1 or 2 people, but multiple people.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, just like the rise of conservative Judaism or right-wing Republican Judaism, people have been predicting the rise of Jews voting Republican for decades, and it just hasn't happened.
I'm not going to argue with you on that point, do it. Like, it's certain things that I do know about and others that I don't, but I will stick to what I do know.
And so what about, God forbid, the pandemic of Jews getting beat up by African Americans, and saying it's not considered, according to the ADL or general police department police report, it's only considered a hate crime when it's a white who does something against a minority. So minority violence is not considered a hate crime, but certainly in New York and even possibly picking up here in our community.
But I think that's an over-exaggeration. Like, there might be those isolated incidents which are unfortunate, but I truly think that the Jewish community is more equipped, to deal with a problem like that. Because if you look at Israel as an example, it's an armed nation. Like, Jews are not naive to how to use self-defense mechanisms.
They are in America. Israel has mandatory military
Maybe it's
service.
a choice that they don't, for whatever reason, that they moral compass tell them not to. But I think that Jews of all groups are one of the groups that, if push came to shove, do know how to organize and use violence more so than the novice group.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the small group of Jews you're involved with, but relatively to statistics, like Jews disproportionately are much less likely to be involved in sports, certainly being policemen or joining the military. So although in Israel you have mandatory military service and it's largely a military state,
Okay,
among
Tom
American
Anderson again,
Jews,
the Crown
it's the opposite.
Heights riots, but the Crown Heights riots was just nothing more than a civil situation that occurred in a neighborhood level, and that's been largely resolved. Like,
but it hasn't. That's what I'm talking about. Like every week a Jew is getting beat up in Crown Heights. It's picking up.
But
again.
you gotta ask yourself: is this
right now?
Is this
it's
orchestrated?
The highest it's been since the riot.
Is this orchestrated or not? Like, where's it coming from? Like, what is the value in it for African Americans just to target this group of people? I don't buy it.
But it is happening. I was saying, like,
I did a play in school about this same subject. Like, yeah, that one incident may have happened when a guy got hit by a car and it was some like negligent behavior. They didn't treat the person that was hit. But since then, I think this has been largely resolved. These are red herrings and other agent provocateurs who try to capitalize and exploit these situations.
We're not in New York. When the statistics are clear, the amount of attacks on Jews is the highest it's been in, since the riots in the 90s. The over 20 years, the incidents so far this year is, double or triple what it's been in previous years. And as said, the majority of the crimes in terms of Jews being assaulted, most of it's happening in New York, and most of it's happening, God forbid, African-American on Jewish violence.
Okay. Being Noah. Yeah. Okay. That was when the Rebbe went to visit Crown Heights.
I have the books on the history there.
Right. Let me speak on his comment. The Rebbe was a shining example of humanity across the board. One of my close friends who is involved with the Chabad movement said that the only thing he didn't accomplish on top of everything he was accomplished is more stuff for the non-Jewish nations that lived around them, more cohesive relations. So yeah, exactly. The Rebbe definitely was instrumental in peaceful relations between all peoples.
Yeah, the riot was ticked off by one of the Rebbe basically never went anywhere. And I think once a month he went to pray at his father-in-law's grave in Queens, and his entourage that had police escort, one of the people in his entourage possibly ran a red light and, God forbid, killed, I think, a Caribbean African-American, or maybe part Hispanic. You could look it up or Google the incident, and that kid died. And that was the precipice of what kicked off the Crown Heights riots. But the pressure, so Crown Heights was a largely Jewish community, largely white community. And then, like a lot of America, there's, so to say, white flight. And
but let me explain something.
Basically, all the non-Jewish whites.
Let me share something with the audience, because I disagree with that wholeheartedly. One of my good friends, who was a young guy, and I won't mention his name, was in a yeshiva up in Crown Heights. His address was literally next door to 770. And he asked me personally to come visit him. And basically, I've been to New York on several different occasions, all through the boroughs, Crown Heights, Brooklyn, Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens. And I've never, ever encountered any problem with religious Jewish people. Actually, they pretty peaceful. I still maintain relations with people I went to school with who live in Toronto currently, but who are from my area. So I just think that all of that, over dramatizing is not going to help the real cause. And I think that stuff is totally over with, in my opinion.
Why? So you're ignoring the fact of that there's an endemic highest levels of Jews getting beat up in decades, and it's happening right now.
Okay, hold that question. Somebody asked about Bernie Sanders' support. Can I explain away the lack of Africans to, well, whatever, Bernie Sanders is not ideal representative as far as the African American community is concerned. Some may go along with him, but not in the mainstream. So next question.
Bernie Sanders was relatively popular among younger Jews. There wasn't a single institutional Jewish organization that I know of that supported Bernie Sanders. In fact, there wasn't a single institutional Jewish organization that I know of that supported President Trump. They all supported Hillary Clinton. These 2020 elections, it's going to be unclear what the institutional community will do. It's almost guaranteed that there will be no institutional Jewish organization that will come out in favor of President Trump. Here in Metro Detroit, the Detroit Jewish News ran ads like every week telling people vote Clinton. Organizational. It was universal support for Clinton, none for Sanders, none for Trump, although there were grassroots people that were excited about Sanders. The Jewish community is going to be in a tough situation here because institutionally, almost all the institutional Jewish structure is Democratic, and it's unclear, if it's Kamala Harris or Biden. There doesn't seem to be much institutional Jewish support for Bernie Sanders, although the younger people, like IFNOTNOW, and we got Detroit Jews for Justice and these growing grassroots groups of young Jews that are very liberal, possibly anti-Israel, and are against the institutional Jewish structures. What they do will be interesting. IFNOTNOW is going to be going around questioning all the local.
Catch Metastopheles. He said Bernie is just an old white man, blacks or whatever. But I agree. I think that guys like him his usefulness is over with, and he's just angry about life, and nobody wants to hear it. But that's just my take on that comment. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, he was successful in pushing Democratic policies, like I showed earlier, that Democratic policy has shifted to the left, and now Democratic socialism is almost the norm. Like Elizabeth Warren, besides for Joe Biden, almost all of the major, maybe Amy Klobuchar, but almost all of the major Democratic candidates these days are basically pushing a Bernie Sanders type agenda. But it's extremely unlike, and we'll see how the primaries, and because there's so many candidates, it could be someone with 20% of support will be able to win the nomination, and it could be none of the people are going to drop out, and so it'll be unclear what happens with such a huge field. And someone maybe with even low 10% support will be able to move ahead, and if that gives someone like Bernie Sanders support. But Sanders is not institutionally one of the favored candidates, and presumably the Jewish community at large institutionally would way more likely be able to support someone like Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden,
Catch
Kamala
those
Harris.
last two questions. You got Count Van.
Just to finish up what I'm saying, although
right.
It's interesting because Elizabeth Warren, if Cory Booker are coming out where they're saying they want to take putative actions against Israel, it'll put the institutional Jewish community in a bind if the popular Democratic candidates have in their platform to take putative actions against Israel.
Well, let me make a quick comment. Like, who's taking those guys serious anyway? They just like hot boxes.
But saying what the Jews are unquestionably going to be supporting the Democratic candidate, and what Democratic candidate you're saying? If the Jewish community is kind of praying that Biden gets the nominee because he's most representative of the old school, like Hillary Clinton status quo, but you're saying Biden's not so likely to get the nominee. Who's the Jewish community going to fall behind if they're not going to fall behind like Booker or Warren, who are questioning Israel extremely?
Well,
I mean, what are your choices out there? Just like Rashida Tlaib is saying, like, who do you got?
Go independent.
But I'm saying it's the Jewish community that's been institutionally Democratic for decades.
I understand what you're saying, but
you think the institutional Jewish community is going to go independent on the presidential elections because they can't find one that supports our agenda?
I don't know. That's still yet to be seen. Scroll back up. I want to catch these last two, like these couple of questions. Count Van Bruno.
Yeah, I'm not sure these comments are. If someone has a clear question, it looks like we're wrapping up. But if you have a clear question, just do an @Duvid first.
Okay.
Just do a very. I mean, if you want to read through it, if DeShean wants to respond to any of the comments, I'll give him time to do it. But if you have a clear question, type it in now @Duvid at the very beginning. The first thing you type.
Let me address Cassandra O'Hara. Like, what you saying is totally absent-minded. According to the Bible and to the Torah, the Jewish lifestyle and religion is not color conscious. So I won't respond to your idiocy of saying that what Jews think about brown people like me, because the first Jews in America were Sephardic. So do your research, Cassandra, before you start making ignorant comments.
Yeah, I was mentioning the point before. I'm saying obviously the first Jews in America were Sephardic. but Sephardim didn't really set up institutions, and the majority of institutions. Maybe I'll do a quick screen share of the. You're saying the institutional Jewry in America is largely set up by Ashkenazic Jews, and you have the conference of the. Let me show this. I'm going to screen share because there's a lot of confusion. So AIPAC, I think it was President Eisenhower who, dealing with the Jewish lobby, requested there to create this organization, the Conference of the Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, and this is Eisenhower in 56. And so here's your list, and this AIPAC is made up of these organizations, and almost all these organizations are largely created by Ashkenazic Jews for Ashkenazic Jews. You have AEPI, the fraternity. You have a whole bunch of things. You have the American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Joint Distribution. You have the American Sephardi Federation, and but almost if you look through all these, the ADL, it's interesting. Like of the 51 organizations, 15 of them start with A, but the ADL is a member organization of AIPAC, B'nai B'rith, Central Conference of American Rabbis, the Conservative Movement, National Council of Young Israel, the Rabbinic Council of America. But if you look through these organizations, I think there's only one Sephardi organization.
But
so saying that, let alone your current wave of other things, but organized American Jewry was largely set up by Ashkenazi Jews for Ashkenazi Jews.
Well, it was set up by a lot of people who came from where they came from in Europe. Each little community, Poles, Germans, Lithuanians.
I showed you had the 50 plus organizations that make up
listen
AIPAC.
To this. That
only
don't mean
one
anything.
Of the 50 is Sephardi.
Listen to this. Because it's a common theme within the Jewish community that every Jew is accepting to another Jew. So it doesn't matter who started it, but that it exists. So I disagree with that too. It's not exclusively for anybody but Jewish people. Primarily, and even non-Jews work for Jewish organizations nowadays and get paid great salaries.
So integration. So you have the falling out of Jewish organizations where largely Jews have stopped being so institutionally involved. The vast majority of Jews who are Reform and conservative are moving to not affiliate. I think over 50% of Jews now are largely unaffiliated, don't belong or go to synagogue anywhere. Jewish community centers are closing down. They're aging. The younger Jewish community, millennials, if they're Orthodox, are more right wing, but if they're not Orthodox, they're more likely to even be anti-Israel. And so you have Israelis or Orthodox Jews are stepping up and becoming more powerful within this institution. Like AIPAC 40 years ago might not have had a single Orthodox rabbi or Chabad rabbi. If you went to AIPAC now, it might be majority Orthodox rabbis, and you have Chabad rabbis everywhere. So that's been that shift. And even for Jews trying, our Jewish institutes here are still largely Ashkenazic, although there might be a goal, like in theory, to include and be inclusive of all Jews. Is that just some theoretical fantasy?
No, it's practical. Catch that question, Forex Shark. I thought that was interesting. The rise of Black conservatism is not happening at all. There are a few prominent Blacks who are being promoted and put in the spotlight by the Republican establishment. Don't hold your breath. I think that there is a very real possibility.
And the Republican establishment is hardly conservative.
Okay, fine. But you know what? That's fair. If that's where you stand, fight it out to the end. But I'm just saying, don't be surprised at the shifting of political demographics. So that's Forex Shark. Good question.
So, hey, hello, generic. What are the Jewish people looking for this election? I mean, we've been discussing that at length. I don't know if you have an exact, answer. And
I don't think the Jewish people is looking for anything other than what everybody else is looking for. It's just economic stability and social cohesion. That's it. I don't see anybody looking for a fairy godmother or anything else.
Okay, so hopefully next week, if you're a regular viewer of this and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe so I can hit the 1,000 subscribers, and hopefully we'll be outside at the Democratic primaries. If it's possible, if someone hooks us up and opens it up to allow us to get in or interview one of the candidates, maybe I'll be out there both nights. Even if I can't get 1,000 subscribers, I would live stream from like some of these platforms like Streamlabs or OBS, but the quality is lower. So now I get on my cell phone, I get 1080 HD video. And if I use like Streamlabs, I think I only get 360 and the video is horrible. So if I don't have 1,000 subscribers and I can't live stream through YouTube, it probably doesn't pay to use the OBS software because the quality will be so poor that I would probably record it and upload it afterwards. I mean, do you know anyone who's going to be on the inside of the Democratic primaries or get a press pass or have ability to, ask questions? So we'll see what happens this week if some of these people come to Detroit early, or if they make themselves available. Like me and DeShean are unlikely to be on the rosters to to be insiders or getting interviews. I'll probably be on the outside interviewing people on the street. I don't know how exciting the street will be, if there's going to be protests or large amounts of people. It could be pretty exciting. I think the second night will be more exciting because
well, you know what, we might have a shot in the dark because I am a member of the Society of Professional Journalists, so I might
to get a press pass.
I can get a press pass. I'm a member of the press.
When you look into it, if you don't have, I mean, what do you know? So look into it. If DeShean is in school for broadcast journalism, he is a member of certain union or group of journalists, so he's going to look into seeing if he could get a press pass. And if that's possible, usually if he could get a press pass, he'll probably be able to get right in the face and ask questions to multiple of the Democratic candidates. Otherwise, I will be outside interviewing people on the street. Jake Turks, who's more conservative, the writer for Ami Magazine, might be coming into town. If he's willing to join me for my show, it would be interesting. His take, he just had a question to President Trump in the news. Otherwise, I think I'm going to stream my Ask the Rabbi number 8 on conversion to Judaism tomorrow afternoon, and it might go for hours. I've been doing a lot of research. It's an extremely complicated question about the origins of conversion to Judaism, whether in the biblical world there was even such a thing as conversion, or circumcision was largely conversion, to the process now that we have for conversion today, and all the disputes with Israeli law or Orthodox conversion versus other forms of conversion, regarding like the racial questions. Currently in Israeli law, it's actually like African migrants or economic migrants or Palestinians are actually by law forbidden to convert to Judaism because it's a certain economic situation. So even if there was a wholehearted, so to say, African migrant that came to Israel, or Palestinian that wanted to become a Jew, technically in Israel it's illegal. And so we're going to look into what's the current state of the law, what the halacha says, what the sages say, what the history of it, what the biblical verses and the Talmudic passage. And I've been doing this research for 2 months now, and I've just been putting it off. But look for tomorrow, Ask the Rabbi number 8, and it'll be a lot of presentation. But I'll also be taking questions, like Ask the Rabbi. So anyone who has had questions on Judaism, tomorrow's stream will be just kind of like the basic Judaism 101. Focusing on conversion, but if you've been, have no one else besides Duvid to ask your questions to Judaism, tomorrow will be your opportunity. So any final words or anything that you wanted to address that you didn't have a chance to, please.
I'd like to say thanks for everybody that tuned in, and definitely, regardless if you agree or disagree, just continue to keep an open mind and be passionate about your positions.
Okay, yeah, thanks for DeShean for joining me, and hopefully, he's going to be able to get himself set up with his own channel and high-speed internet and the technology to be able to do this on his own. But till he has that set up, I'm happy to have him here in my house and continue streaming. Next week, we probably won't do a regular stream because we'll be on site at the Democratic primaries, or maybe Thursday night, possibly Thursday night if the primaries are interesting.
Thank you, Ben Noah. He said good stream.
He's been following me for over a year, is a regular viewer. Appreciate that. And so we'll see what happens after the primaries, or where we'll take
Tom
this.
Anderson, thanks again.
Yeah, so we appreciate everyone tuning in. I'll read through the chat, and after I'm going to cook dinner for me and DeShean right after this, and we'll play it back and make sure we saw the comments. Sometimes people are just talking to each other, so it's hard to know, and it goes quickly. If people have topics, you could join my Discord, leave in the comments. I'm in regular communication with DeShean, so if you have questions for DeShean, put it in the comments and I'll forward them to him. Or if you have topics that you'd like us to discuss in the future, make recommendations. And also, if you have possible guests or people want to join, and it said DeShean right now is not set up to be able to stream. Hopefully he'll be able to get his purchase a proper computer or i8 plus or whatever is required. Costs probably at least $1,000 to have the high-speed internet and all that. But till then, if there's anyone who wants to invite him onto a bigger stream, I would be willing to let him set up in my house for that. So take care, everyone. Till next time, thanks for tuning in.
Good night.